Hey Defenders, this is Chaplain Lormond. So many of the people that come in to talk to me are often not dealing with clinical level mental health issues. They're just dealing with life. We live in a culture that really despises the idea of suffering and really loves the pursuit of pleasure. COVID has taught all of us that pleasure sometimes just isn't a possibility. We're all going through really hard times. So I'd like to suggest to you that in fact, suffering, whether it be in a relationship or with the loss of a loved one or just financial difficulties, is simply part of the human condition. It's the norm for most of us most of the time. I can't think back on a time where there wasn't some level of suffering in my life. And because of that, suffering is not preventable, but it is something that we can accept. And by accepting, we can live past or move past. Suffering is part of our lives. But if we make suffering the thing we think about all day, if we're living in our head and not in our bodies and not in our workspaces or with our kids or our spouse or our families, then that suffering really becomes all-consuming. Everything becomes a part of it. And we begin to believe what our mind tells us about that suffering, which is things like, it'll never end, it'll never get better, or it's hopeless. So one thing I would encourage you to do is when you have these thoughts about suffering, you see them just as thoughts, not as infallible articulations of reality, but just your mind telling you something about what you're feeling. So instead of having a thought like, it's hopeless, you can say something like, I'm having feelings of hopelessness. You see how that creates a little emotional distance for you and your thoughts? You're not so fused to them as you were before. They're no longer the infallible lens on which you see the world. You can take it even one more step further and say, and this is going to sound funny, but I notice that I'm having thoughts that it's hopeless. That's sort of 2 steps back. And when we gain this mental space, this head space, if you will, it allows us to analyze those thoughts more carefully. Is it true that it'll never get better? Has it always been like this? Must it always be the way it is if it hasn't always been so? So this is a little tool that I like to give to people in counseling just to gain some distance and some diffusion between a person's thoughts and their experiences. Suffering, unfortunately, is part of the human condition. It can't be avoided, but it doesn't have to consume our whole day, our whole week, and our whole life. We can accept suffering as part of life and then commit to act in accordance with our values as we move forward. Hope you guys are well. I'm headed down to deploy. Feel free to reach out on Facebook or via text or WhatsApp if you're in an emergency. Our chapel team here at Ramstein is definitely going to have you covered. We're available 24/7, 365 through command posts. And of course, all chaplains have privileged communication, which means that we're mandatory non-reporters. And all of the areas that other providers like mental health and the MFLACs and all of the fantastic professionals we have around us, who I use, by the way, we also cannot report the things that they are mandated to report. So feel free to reach out. Love you guys, not because of what you do, but just because of who you are and because you are deserving and worthy of that love. Feel free to reach out. Thanks again. Bye-bye.